He slipped sleeping pills into my glass of water in broad daylight, in front of the whole family, just to see how I would nod off under the water. My cousin almost killed me over a prank, filmed as if it were for YouTube, except I didn't have the right to hit pause. There was no replay button, and if it hadn't been for a stranger, I might not be here to tell you this. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever almost died just because someone decided you were not worth caring about, then this story is for you. And if you want to see justice, speak up. Then subscribe to Revenge Mark, because I will never stay silent again. That day was my birthday. A warm Saturday afternoon in mid-July. My family's lake house was alive with music, barbecue, and laughter. People were gathered around the pool, chatting, clinking glasses, calling each other's names. Everyone thought it was going to be a happy day. I walked out carrying 2 drinks, one for me, one for Ethan, my cousin, the man I used to call my unofficial big brother. Ethan looked casual, white t-shirt, shorts, that crooked smirk. He handed me a sparkling orange drink. Come on, birthday girl, drink up. Forget all your worries. I took a sip. The taste was strange, a faint bitterness. But I didn't think twice. Why would I? I turned back toward the pool, walking as my head started to feel heavier, my legs like weights dragging me down. A dizzy fog was creeping into my every muscle, and then I slipped. The loud splash echoed as my body hit the water. Do you know what their first reaction was? Laughter. Oh my God! Is this a new stunt, someone said. Another burst out laughing. This girl deserves an Oscar. They thought I was pretending, that I was just trying to get attention, because in their eyes, I had always been the dramatic one. The daughter of Sandra Kingsley, a single mom, was always seen by them as over the top. In their eyes, I had never been worth their concern. And as I began to sink, not one person moved, by luck or fate. Only one person noticed my limp, bluish hand drifting beneath the surface. Margot, a guest who had come with my aunt, didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She dove in as if nothing else mattered, dragged me to the edge, my whole body ice cold. Everyone stood frozen. Ethan gave an awkward laugh, stepping back. She probably just had a mild reaction to sleeping pills. Sleeping pills. I was rushed to the ER, unconscious for 2 days, MRI scans, reflex tests. They found a high dose of diphenhydramine, a drug that can cause deep coma if mixed with soda. The police were called, and the garden cameras, the ones Ethan forgot about, captured the exact moment he slipped the pills into my drink. But the worst part wasn't the poison. It was their eyes, that indifference. Cold as the lake water. If it hadn't been for Margot, would anyone in my family have saved me? I woke up in a room as white as snow. The fluorescent light above me buzzed faintly. A breathing tube pierced through my nose, and my throat felt raw and scorched, as if scraped by a blade. The first sensation wasn't pain, it was cold. Not from my body, but from the eyes of the person sitting beside me. My mother. She sat exactly an arm's length away, yet it felt like an ocean between us. No hand-holding, no tears, no asking if I was okay. Just one sentence, spoken in a tired voice. Ethan will be in serious trouble if you tell the police he did it on purpose. I turned my face away. Tears welled up not from the medication, but because, in that moment, my heart shattered into pieces. The days after that were an unnamed hell. I couldn't stand on my own. My body trembled every time I stepped out of bed. My head throbbed dully, as if something inside had been permanently severed. The doctor said, "Luckily, there's no deep brain damage, but vestibular disorder, loss of balance, and panic attacks could last for months." I forced a weak smile, but in my mind, there was only one question. Why would the only person who ever called me little sister try to kill me? Ethan was investigated by the police. The security camera footage was undeniable proof. But what stunned me wasn't the video. It was my family's reaction. My Aunt Ethan's mother came to the hospital, not to apologize, but to say, "Please don't ruin his future." He didn't mean it. He just thought it was a prank I nearly died. And they called that a prank. I began to withdraw into silence. I said nothing during the investigation meetings. I didn't reply to messages from relatives. I didn't want to hear another word like "Ethan loves you like a sister." Maybe he just had a little too much to drink. I curled up in bed, shut the curtains, and turned off my phone. I was afraid of everything. Even footsteps in the hallway made me flinch. Every dream dragged me back to that lake. The icy water, the laughter, and the deadly silence as I struggled to breathe. One evening, I overheard a nurse talking on the phone in the hallway. That young woman. She doesn't talk to anyone, just stares at the ceiling all day. I don't think she's living. She's just not dead yet. That sentence pierced straight into my heart like a needle. I wasn't living. I was just not dead. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered being pulled ashore, lips blue, skin ice cold, while my mother, the same woman who once cradled me when I burned with fever at age 5, just stood there. No tears, no calling my name, just a sigh. I started to wonder, have I always been a burden? Was I meant to be left behind when the police asked again? I still hadn't signed the complaint, not because I wanted to forgive, but because I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight. I looked in the mirror, a pale face, dark circles under my eyes. I didn't recognize myself. A voice in my head whispered, "Ethan almost killed you, and your whole family chose to defend him. Who are you in this world?" The answer hasn't come, but one thing I know for certain, I will never forget. Not because I am weak, but because I am slowly remembering everything, every word they said, every glance, every step they took as they turned away, and maybe, one day, I will make them remember it with me. I can't remember the exact day I first thought about revenge. There was no thunder, no lightning, just a breathless moment of silence, one among hundreds of others exactly like it. Maybe it was when I curled up on the hospital bed, overhearing my mother on the phone booking tickets to Florida with her friends, saying she needed time to recover mentally. I lay there, staring at the blindingly white ceiling. A voice spoke in my head, quiet but sharp as a razor. She needs to recover. What about me? Or maybe it started the night I found out Ethan posted an Instagram story, a picture by the pool, the same place where I almost died, with the caption, "Just chill. Everything will pass." I stared at the screen. My hands started shaking, not because I was afraid, but because I had never felt so invisible. I had nearly died, and he was laughing. I began reinstalling my social media apps, scrolling through old posts. I wanted to see what people were saying about me. No one said anything. No one asked why I had disappeared. No one mentioned what happened at the pool. No one brought up Ethan. It was as if it had never happened. In their eyes, I had never existed long enough to be remembered. I slipped into a quiet state, but I was no longer panicking. I no longer cried from being hurt. I was angry, and when anger runs deep enough, it doesn't scream, it whispers. I'll make them see me, once and forever. One morning, I sat across from the lawyer the hospital had referred me to. He looked at my medical records, raising his brows. I need to know if you intend to pursue criminal charges. There's enough evidence to prosecute Ethan. I looked at him, then shook my head. He looked surprised. You don't want him held accountable. I smiled for the first time in weeks and said, not that way. I didn't want a trial. I wanted him to know I was still alive. I wanted him to understand what I had seen, what I remembered. I wanted him to be afraid, every day, every hour. I wanted him to taste invisibility the way I had. I came home after 3 weeks of recovery. My room was the same. The window was stuck shut. No light came in. My mother wasn't there. She sent a text. Make sure you're eating properly. I'm busy with a few projects in Austin. I didn't reply. I spent the whole evening printing out old photos from childhood when Ethan and I played together, laughed, ran, hugged, and I marked each moment before he betrayed me. I needed to remember, not too long for it, but to draw the line. From now on, I would never be the weak little girl I once was. I wrote out a list. The people who laughed when I fell, the ones who called Ethan's actions just a joke, the ones who turned away when I needed them most. I didn't want to kill anyone. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to hear my name and bow their heads. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. I chopped off the long hair my mother had always loved. My hands no longer trembled. I looked straight at myself, at the girl who had died in that cold water that day, and whispered, Ethan, you drowned me once, but you forgot. I know how to swim. I started with the small things. First, my body. I went back to the old gym I had once signed up for, but quit after only 3 sessions. I renewed my monthly pass, stepped onto the treadmill in silence, ran. Every morning, every evening, no music, no headphones, just my breath and the pounding of blood in my ears. I needed to feel my heart still beating. I needed to remember that I still had control over myself. Then came the way I dressed. I got rid of all the chiffon dresses and the soft lace. The things my mother had bought for me back in high school, when she wanted me to look gentle and marriageable. I wore black. I wore gray. I wore tight-fitting sportswear. Not to hide my body, but to feel every movement. I wanted to feel myself again, after too many months of being treated like a shadow. I didn't post anything online. I left no trace. But I followed Ethan, quietly. He posted pictures of himself going out, laughing with his new girlfriend. His friends commented with jokes and teasing, as if nothing had happened. No one mentioned the falling asleep under the pool stunt anymore. The incident was buried. Ethan was only put on internal probation at school. He wasn't expelled. No criminal record, because I hadn't signed the complaint. I had forgiven, and he thought that meant freedom. One day, I signed up for a new class on camera acting. When I filled out the form, my hand paused for a second. Class name, The Art of Emotional Control on Stage. I looked up, staring at myself in the mirror mounted by the entrance. Good. I'll act. not for an audience. I'll act for them. The acting teacher was a former image consultant in the legal field. He told us people believe what looks real, not what is real. I wrote that down on a sticky note, stuck it on my mirror. That night, I began practicing controlling every frown, every breath. But the outside changes weren't enough. I knew that if I wanted Ethan and others like him to pay, I couldn't just be a betrayed girl. I had to have power. I applied for an internship at a small law firm owned by a friend of my mother's. The same man I had heard specialized in juvenile violence cases, emotional abuse, and those incidents not serious enough for court. My first task: organizing case files of abandoned lawsuits most ended because the victim withdrew or the families settled privately. I read every line. Each case was a stab at my memory. A girl was poisoned by a classmate out of jealousy. A child was drugged by a relative so they could film a funny clip. No one was prosecuted. I began keeping the names, taking note of the patterns, looking for connections. Ethan wasn't the only one, and I wasn't the first. 3 months after nearly dying, I looked back at my journal and saw the first line I had written: I just want to live in peace. Now, I crossed that out. Wrote instead, I want them to know some people don't die. They're just waiting for the right time to give it all back. The next morning, Ethan sent me an invitation to the school's welcome summer party. Part of me wanted to tear it up. The other part smiled. I was ready. And that party would not be like the last one. I arrived at the party in a simple knee-length black dress, just enough so no one would think I was trying to draw attention. Hair neatly pinned up, flat shoes, light makeup. I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to blend in, because tonight wasn't about celebrating. It was about planting the first seed. Ethan was one of the first to spot me. He froze mid-conversation with his friends, eyes widening. I gave a small, polite smile as if nothing had ever happened. No mention, no reference to the pool, no need. Because my silence unsettled him more than any accusation ever could. The party was held on campus, soft golden lights draping over everything, gentle music playing in the background. I chatted with a few people, nodded at surprised looks, and walked past those who had once laughed in my face. No long speeches, just showing them I was still here, and I was no longer the same girl I used to be. The plan began when I stepped into the photo booth area, where people were lining up for pictures. I went over to the props table, picked up a small sign that read, "Best night ever." I made sure to let a bit of the fake bandage peek out from under my sleeve, just enough for people to notice, but not enough for them to ask. I stood next to Ethan in the frame, and he stiffened. I looked straight into the camera, smiled, click. I asked someone to send me the photo, both the original and the edited version. Later, I quietly uploaded it to a brand new social media account. No name, no face. The only caption under the photo read, "When the guy who almost killed you is also the one posing for a keepsake photo with you. Smile. Everything is just beginning." No one knew who owned the account, but within hours, the picture started making the rounds in the student group chat. An anonymous girl, a spine-chilling caption, and one guy, Ethan, was forcing a weak smile beside her. The next morning, Ethan texted me. Just 3 words. "What are you doing?" I didn't reply, because the first strike needs no explanation. I kept updating the account. Not often, only at the right moments. Little details, a hospital slip with the name blurred out, An excerpt from the school's file on an undisclosed disciplinary violation by a male student. No outright claims, just hints. People began to talk. No one was certain, but they started to suspect. And sometimes, suspicion alone is enough to shatter the peace of someone who has always thrived on other people's silence. I knew Ethan was starting to get nervous. He deleted a few old posts, limited his comments, temporarily locked his secondary account. But the more he tried to hide, the more people looked. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone look away when I was drowning. I was going to make them all face it. Standing in the campus building elevator, I stared at my reflection in the metal doors. An ordinary girl. But this time, I wasn't here just to survive. I was here to change the ending. If you think the first strike was cold enough, hit subscribe to the Revenge Mark channel to see the next blows. Justice doesn't always start in a courtroom. It sometimes begins with a gaze that refuses to turn away. 3 days after the photo went viral, Ethan was officially summoned by the school's board of directors. Not because I sued him, but because public opinion was closing in, because of anonymous posts. Secrets and whispers leaked, and they started to turn into open questions. I heard the news from a classmate. He whispered to me, "They say Ethan had some kind of incident with a female student back in freshman year. Do you know about that?" I shrugged. I didn't need to confirm it. I just needed the villain to feel like he was being watched. And he did. The next morning, I went to class. I opened my laptop. My email popped up. An unfamiliar message sat right at the top of my inbox. No sender name. Just the words, "I know who you are." Below was a picture of me, exactly taken from behind as I was walking out of class the night before. I froze in my seat. My heart pounded like a drum. I glanced around. No one was looking at me, but I knew someone had just sent me a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I cleared my cache, changed my passwords, and turned off my phone's location. I knew Ethan wasn't doing this alone. He had never been smart enough to hit back in such a calculated way. Someone was helping him. Someone was watching my every move. And this was no longer a one-way game. 2 days later, Margot, the woman who had pulled me out of the lake, called for the first time since that day. Her voice was urgent. "He came to see me. Ethan. He asked if I was sure I saw you about to die." My throat tightened. "Are you okay?" I'm old, but still sharp enough not to be intimidated by him. She paused, then spoke more slowly, "But you can't back down, because he's starting to panic." I hung up. Something shifted inside me. Not fear, but a familiar sensation being targeted. Only this time, I wasn't helpless. Ethan started hitting back publicly. He filed a complaint with the Student Affairs Office, accusing me of harassment, fabrication, and damaging personal reputation. An emergency meeting was called. I walked into a white-walled room with 3 people sitting across from me, the dean, my academic advisor, and a judicial officer from the university's office. Papers were spread out in front of me. The man's voice was cold. "Do you have anything to say about the anonymous account spreading false information?" I exhaled slowly. No panic, no fumbling. I looked straight into his eyes. "No, I do not own that account, and I have never made any public statements about Ethan Kingsley." They exchanged glances. One of them took notes. Another gave a small nod. I left the meeting feeling lighter because I knew I had just made them understand that I wasn't going to be taken down easily. And Ethan was losing control. That night, I found a sealed envelope at my front door with no sender's name. Inside were printed copies of 5 photos of me with my best friend Lena, at a coffee shop, at the library, or in the parking lot, and one bold line printed beneath them, with no signature if you keep going, the next one won't be you. I clenched the papers in my hand, no trembling, just one ice-cold thought running through my mind. They dare touch someone I love. Then there's no turning back now. I didn't call the police about the photos. I didn't want them to know I was scared. Instead, I took Lena out of town for a few days. We went back to her home in the countryside, a place where no one knew who I was. We didn't talk about Ethan. There were only crickets, the smell of old wood, and the silent sky. One night, Lena asked, "Are you sure you're okay?" I turned to her and whispered, "I'm not okay, but I know what I have to do." The next morning, I returned to campus. I wore the same black dress from that first party, not this time to hide, but to remind him. I hadn't disappeared. I filed an official complaint with the school administration, backed by the evidence I had gathered throughout my internship, excerpts of leaked emails from the student internal system, and notes about covered-up ethics violations. I didn't aim directly at Ethan. I simply stated there was a lack of transparency in the handling of serious incidents involving students, and I signed my real name. The news spread quickly. A group of student journalists got involved. They organized an open forum. I didn't speak. I just sat in the back. But when a male student stood up and said, "If anyone has ever been threatened, ever been forced into silence, don't be afraid to speak up. This is the time." I saw a few heads nod, a few others lowered, and on one hand, whose it was, I didn't know, rested gently on my back. I wasn't alone anymore. Ethan, he started to unravel. One of his old posts, in which he had tagged me with a mocking caption after the pool incident, was dug up. Hundreds of comments. People are calling him out. People are mocking him. The school suspended all his club activities. He was banned from appearing at any student representative events. A formal internal investigation was launched. I didn't jump up with joy. I didn't scream. I've won. I just sat in my room, looking out through the frosted window. Quietly, I opened my laptop, typed a few lines in my journal. He's lost his role. I've reclaimed my voice. The balance is shifting. And then, something unexpected happened. A stranger messaged me on social media. Her name was Madison. "I used to date Ethan 3 years ago. I read your story. Maybe I have something you'd want to know." My heart froze. I called immediately. Her voice was calm, almost cold. "He once recorded me, threatened to leak it if I broke up with him." I couldn't say anything. I just clutched the phone. She went on, "I once thought about suing, but my parents told me to stay quiet to keep the peace. Now I don't want peace anymore." She sent me a recording. Ethan's voice rang out clearly. "That girl. She almost died over a couple of pills, and now thinks she's the main character or something. No one's gonna believe her. Nobody will." I replayed it 5 times. With each listen, something rose in my chest. Something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, not pain, but confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I had been right. I saved the file in 3 different places. One was on a drive, one was burned onto a disk, and one was sent to my lawyer. I didn't release it. Not yet. Because I knew, next time, it wouldn't be a small strike. 3 days after I received the recording from Madison, I thought I had the upper hand. I hadn't made anything public yet. I still went to class, still smiled when I saw Ethan hurrying nervously down the hallway. I thought I was in control of the game. I forgot. People like him never play fair. Lena disappeared. No messages, no calls. I ran to her dorm door, locked from the inside. Her roommate said. She left around noon. Said she had to go home urgently. I called. No answer. A sharp chill ran down my spine. That night, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No name. I picked up. A slow, raspy voice on the other end, steady and deliberate. Don't let someone else suffer the consequences of your personal business. I froze. They're not involved, I said, my voice almost breaking. The person gave a soft laugh, then hung up. I called Lena's mom. She said, Lena did come home, but she didn't say anything. She just cried, then slept for hours. I sank down to the floor, my back against the wall. My eyes burned, not because I was scared for myself, but because I knew I had pulled an innocent person into this. The next morning, I got an email from the department. The email account I'd used to submit my complaint had been hacked. Someone had sent messages from that account to the entire system, distorting, twisting, and fabricating. The result? My complaint was temporarily taken down to verify its authenticity. Ethan wasn't coming at me head-on. He was going after everything I'd built. I didn't scream. I didn't lose my temper. I just sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote in big letters, "They're scared, but they still have a chance to destroy me." I knew this game. I had been a victim before. And now, I had to face it as someone in control. I went to the hospital to see Lena. She sat there, eyes swollen, hands wrapped in cotton bandages. Someone left an envelope under my car seat, Lena said quietly. Inside were pictures of me and you, written on them, pick the right side, or suffer like her. I didn't ask who her was. I knew. It was me. I took her hand. For the first time. My voice wasn't calm. "I'm sorry. I'm not worth you going through this." Lena shook her head. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. "No, you are. And they don't get to win." That night, I went home and opened my laptop, logged into an anonymous account. I didn't write much. Just one caption. Attached is the audio file. When someone thinks he's untouchable, he'll say everything with complete honesty. Listen to his voice. No tagging names, no pointing fingers. But everyone knew. The storm hit within an hour. The school forum exploded. Private groups overflowed with comments. Part of the online crowd was skeptical. The other party is furious. Ethan's name started getting tied to words like manipulator, abuser, and predator. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cold. This was only the beginning. And if I let the people I loved keep getting hurt, I'd be no better than him. I thought I was stronger. I thought I had made it past those days of curling up in bed, trembling in the dark. But that night, when my phone screen lit up with a flood of hateful messages from strange accounts, I felt that same old feeling all over again, small, isolated, and unsure if I had any control over anything. "You anonymous bitch," like stirring up trouble. "Huh, watch out, or someone else might die because of you." I tossed the phone onto the table. My vision blurred partly from anger, partly from exhaustion, and partly from fear. I refused to let myself cry. But the tears still came. I thought of Lena. She was still at home. Her mother called every morning, updating me on her daughter's condition as if I were a blood relative. And every time she said, she still can't eat anything. My chest tightened painfully. If I hadn't pulled Lena into this, maybe she would have been fine. I thought of Madison. No contact since the recording was posted. I thought of Margot. No further messages. Everything was eerily quiet. And sometimes, quiet is the scariest sound of all. I sat in front of the mirror. No makeup. No attempt to hide the dark circles. I stared at myself. Red eyes, messy hair, ragged breaths. Then I whispered, "Who do you think you are, thinking you can demand justice? You're just a half-dead nuisance, burdening everyone else." I started typing a message to Lena. Typed, deleted, typed again, deleted again. I was going to write, "I'm sorry. I'll stop." But my fingers didn't hit send, because if I stopped, then what was all of this for? I went back to bed, pulled the blanket over myself, closed my eyes, hoped for a dreamless sleep. But there was none. In my mind, everything rewound like a film in reverse. I was sinking under the water. No one jumped in. Laughter echoed across the lake. My mother's voice saying, "You shouldn't make a big deal out of this." And then, a look. Ethan was standing there, watching, smiling. I jolted awake at 3:12 a.m., soaked in sweat, heart pounding. I stepped out of my room, sat in the kitchen, opened my laptop, stared at the blank screen. I could erase everything, take down the posts, disappear from the internet, live like before. But what was before lying silent under the water? Waiting for someone to care, I replayed Ethan's recording. This time, no skipping, no overanalyzing, just listening. And then I whispered, not looking at the mirror, not looking at anyone, "I won't let you win." My voice was still shaking, but I'd heard it once now. And this time, it meant something real. I emailed the school administration again, attached a copy of the recording with a detailed explanation of its origin, date, and the identity of the person who provided it. I wrote, "I used to be afraid, but silence saves no one. I am willing to testify, and I hope the school is willing to do what's right." I hit send. My hands were trembling, but I didn't delete it. I didn't take it back. The next morning, I received an email reply from the school board. Short, clear. "We have received and verified the recording. The disciplinary hearing will be held next week. Thank you for your courage. Courage." I stared at those two words for several long minutes. I had never thought of myself as courageous. I was just surviving. But maybe, sometimes, surviving is a kind of victory. Lena sent her first message after days of silence. I heard it. The recording. "I'm proud of you." I cried. Not loudly, not in sobs. Just quiet tears falling onto my phone screen, like they were finally allowed to exist after all those days of holding my breath. I left the house, walked around the lake, the place where I once thought I had died. The water today was as still as glass. Sunlight poured down like it was trying to wash away every shadow that had ever stained this place. I stood there, silent. My legs still shook, but my heart, steadier than ever. Madison texted me back, "2. If you testify, I'll do it with you. I'm tired of staying silent." I didn't need to ask anything else. I just replied with one word, "Thanks." One of the students who had spoken up at the earlier meeting sought me out in the library. "You did what we thought no one would dare to do." I laughed, my voice hoarse. I used to think that, too. That night, I opened the notebook where I had once written my darkest lines. I wrote on a fresh page, "No one is born strong, but if no one gives you strength, you have to make it yourself." I organized the evidence, reached out to the lawyer again, prepared for the hearing. No more hiding, no more anonymity. I would stand there with my real name, my real face, and my real story. Ethan would be there. The school would be there. And this time, I wouldn't look down. I knew there would still be obstacles ahead. Some would say I was exaggerating. Some would doubt me, but I wasn't looking for approval anymore. I was looking for the truth. And the truth is the only thing that can make the darkness step back. Before going to bed, I checked the last anonymous post. Over 1,000 shares. Most of them are supportive. One pinned comment stood out at the top. "No one deserves to be pushed under, but some people know how to rise and bring the light with them for others." I read it over and over. Maybe I didn't survive just to stay silent. If you believe that everyone deserves to be heard, hit subscribe to Revenge Mark, because every survival story is proof that justice doesn't just exist in books. I no longer felt nervous, only focused. Still, the quiet that often comes before a storm. 3 days before the hearing, I stayed up until nearly dawn, going through every single timeline, from the glass of orange juice by the pool, to the threatening email, to the audio recording Madison sent me. Each detail was like a bone dislocated, cold, but now they had a spine, a structure, a direction, and I was the only one who knew how to piece them back together. Madison sent another note, a journal entry she wrote after leaving Ethan. Short, but haunting. He always told me I had no value unless I was obedient. I believed that for a very long time. I held the paper, my grip tightening, not out of anger, but because I had once carried that same twisted belief. That night, Lena came to my room. She brought hot coffee and a paper bag of pastries. She didn't say much. She just sat beside me, going through every report, every excerpt, every photo of evidence. "I want you to know," she said, her voice hoarse after hours of straining her eyes. "If this doesn't end the way we hope, I'm still here." I nodded. My throat tightened, not from worry, but from knowing that, this time, I wasn't alone. I rewrote the opening for my statement at the hearing. It didn't start with what Ethan had done. I started with what I had once feared the most. I was afraid that if I spoke, no one would believe me. I was afraid that if I stayed silent, no one would survive to tell the story. I met with my lawyer again. This time, I didn't wait for him to ask questions. I laid everything out clearly, precisely, and straight to the point. "You're more prepared than anyone I've worked with in the past 2 years," he said. "I've seen you break down, but now I see you standing tall." I didn't smile. I only nodded. 2 days before the big day, I received the official confirmation an independent committee would be present at the hearing. The audio recording had been authenticated. The second witness, Madison, had registered to speak. For the first time, the school wasn't considering, they were acting, and I knew truth, no matter how late, still carries weight. The day before the hearing, I walked past the auditorium where it would all take place. The doors were still locked. The lights are off. Inside, everything lay in silence. I stood there for a long while, not to imagine a victory, but to remind myself I had already walked out of death's shadow. I wasn't going back. On the final night, Ethan sent me a message. Just one word. You. I stared at it. No anger. No fear. I deleted the message. Then I turned the speakers on and played the recording of his own voice. No one's gonna believe her anyway. I closed my eyes. This time, I didn't dream of drowning. I saw myself walking into the light, through the silence of those who had once turned away. That morning, no rain, no sunshine. The sky was the color of ash, as if it too were waiting for something to happen. I left the dorm at 7:15. No makeup, no perfume, just me. Neat, clear-headed, and fully present in my own body. The school was holding the hearing in the boardroom on the 3rd floor. Frosted glass doors, curtains half drawn, a long table, chairs on both sides, 3 school representatives, 1 attorney, 1 independent legal officer, and the 2 main parties. I arrived 10 minutes early. I opened my bag and placed each set of documents on the table the same way I had done hundreds of times before. But this time, it wasn't to prepare for a presentation. It was to defend myself. The door opened. Ethan walked in. He was wearing a white dress shirt, hair slicked back with gel. His face was unnervingly calm. He glanced at me as if he'd just run into someone by chance at the grocery store. No shame, no anger, just emptiness. That was what chilled me most. Not insults, but indifference. He sat down, placed his phone on the table, and greeted no one. I didn't say a word. I only looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Not to threaten, not to intimidate, just to remind him that I was here unbowed. The meeting began. The school representative's voice was flat, as if reading from a script. The questions circled around the timeline, the location, the parties involved, and the methods of gathering evidence. I spoke slowly, clearly. Each time I mentioned Ethan's name, I didn't look his way. I didn't need his eyes to confirm the truth. I had lived it. Madison was called in afterward. She stood, hands slightly trembling, but her eyes didn't blink. Ethan threatened me with a secretly recorded video. He said if I ever spoke up, he would post it online. I stayed silent for nearly 3 years. One of the board members asked, "Why are you speaking up now?" She lifted her head, glanced at me for a second, then answered, "Because someone had the courage to stand up first, and I don't want her to have to stand alone." The air in the room shifted. No one spoke for several minutes. Ethan clenched his hands. Just a little. For the first time during the entire hearing, I saw him blinking rapidly. By the end, his lawyer delivered the rebuttal. My client does not admit to any intentional misconduct. All interactions were of a personal nature, lacking sufficient legal evidence. I didn't react. I knew they would say that, because that's what people who've always had privilege rely on. There are gaps in the law, not the absence of a conscience. Before concluding, one of the school representatives turned to me. "Do you have anything else you wish to say?" I stood up, looked directly at the person asking, then around the entire room. I'm not telling this story to be praised for courage. I'm telling it because if I don't speak up, another girl might never get the chance to. There was no applause. This wasn't a stage, but one member of the hearing board gave a small nod, very slight, and that was enough. I stepped into the hallway, not rushing, not trembling, just taking a deep breath, as if I had just surfaced from the bottom of icy water. This time, no one laughed. No one doubted. This time, I wasn't pretending to live anymore. I had truly come back. The last message from Ethan came at 9:42 p.m. If you want to end this, come to the old basketball court. Just once. I read it in silence. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what for. I just stood up, put on my coat, and went. The back court behind the school was still as dark as the last time I was there. The grass was tall, weeds overgrown, the motion sensor light long broken. Only the moon hung overhead, casting its pale light on the cold concrete like a scene from an old dream. Ethan was waiting, alone, no posturing, no guard up, no smile. For the first time, he didn't seem to be acting. I walked closer, stopped just far enough that we could hear each other's breathing. He spoke first, his voice low. "What more do you want? I've lost enough already." I looked at him for a moment. "No, I don't want anything more. I just came to see, with my own eyes. The man who thought he could push me to the bottom and no one would care." Ethan let out a short, quiet laugh. "You want me to apologize?" I shook my head. "No, because I know an apology from you means nothing, and it can't give me back the months I've lost." He stepped closer. The wind tossed my hair, but I didn't move. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. "I used to be," I replied, so afraid I couldn't sleep. I lost friends. I even lost the voice inside my own head. I looked straight into his eyes, but today, I'm not afraid anymore. Not because I'm stronger than you, but because I have nothing left to hide. Ethan looked away. For a fleeting moment, in his eyes, there was something like unsteadiness. "You know," he muttered, "from the start, I thought this would blow over quickly, that you'd stay quiet like everyone else." I clenched my fists. "You were partly right. I almost stayed quiet, but there's one thing you don't understand." I paused. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. Silence has its limits. We both fell silent. Neither of us took another step. No shouting. No conclusions. Only the truth stood between two people who had once stood at opposite ends of the same pain. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Ethan said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "And I don't need to," I answered quietly, "because forgiveness isn't something you get to ask for." He turned away, slowly, no noise, no final words, just turned away, and I stayed there, alone, on the old ground, under a night sky that no longer felt as dark as before. The next day, Ethan was officially suspended from school. Madison filed a criminal complaint. The school announced changes to its internal policies, forming an independent committee to handle reports. My name wasn't mentioned in the announcement, and I didn't need it to be, because I didn't do this to get credit. I did it so no one else would have to go through what I survived. That night, I went back to my room. I took down every sticky note from my mirror, turned off the light, got into bed, and for the first time in months, I didn't think about the lake, or the indifferent stares, or a limp hand beneath the cold water. I just thought I've made it to shore, and I'm still me. Things didn't end with applause. There were no flowers, no relieved smiles, only that strange stillness after the storm has passed. I had stood up. I had spoken out. I had made Ethan bow his head, but none of that erased what I had lost. Madison continued with the lawsuit. I didn't take part. I handed her all my documents, photos, and journals. She was the one who carried on down the path I had opened. As for me, I chose to step back, quietly, Lena was slowly getting better. She smiled more and started going back to school. We still met every week, sometimes just to sit in silence, saying nothing at all. Once, while we were sitting next to each other by the cafe window, Lena held my hand gently. You did what the adults should have done from the very beginning. I smiled, but my eyes didn't smile. Margot called. Her voice was low and steady. I'm proud I saved the right person. Then she paused, and sad that I ever had to save you. I didn't see my mother often anymore. Since the hearing, she'd been silent, as if she too was facing the truth she had spent so long trying to deny. One day, she texted, I don't know what to say yet, but I'm listening. I didn't reply right away, because forgiveness isn't something you can settle in one afternoon. I kept going to school, kept working, but now, whenever I walked into a room with strangers, I noticed their eyes. Part of me had gotten used to those probing glances. Part of me still couldn't stop feeling like I was being read. I once thought that when all this ended, I'd feel completely free. The truth is, I didn't. Victory, even the righteous kind, still carries the scent of blood. No one walks away from a battlefield without a scar. One night, I played Ethan's recording again, not to strengthen my resolve, but to check if I still felt anything at all. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt tired. I had lived for months inside rage, inside fear, inside the need to set things right. But now, with justice seeming to have tipped the scales back, I saw more clearly I had lost those carefree years, and I would never get them back. I wrote one line in my notebook, justice is not happiness, but it's the condition for healing to begin. Ethan no longer appeared. The school never said exactly what disciplinary action he faced. I didn't ask. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me was afraid I wouldn't be satisfied with any outcome, because justice never truly fills the void. One day, I saw a freshman quietly crossing the campus, holding a complaint form, eyes full of uncertainty. I didn't ask her what it was about. I just stood up, placed my hand on her shoulder, and she looked at me, a nod. No words. Maybe my ultimate goal wasn't to make Ethan pay. It was to make sure those who came after me wouldn't have to stay silent for so long. May drifted by like a warm, still stream. No ripples, no turbulence, just different. A quiet, smoldering kind of different that's hard to name. I began to write again. Not an accusation, not a report, but a journal. Line by line, sentence by sentence. Not to prove anything, not to fight back. I just want to relive it, but this time on my own terms. Once, Lena asked me, "How do you feel now?" Was it worth it, I thought for a moment, then replied, "I don't know, but if I hadn't done it, I don't think I'd ever forgive myself." She didn't ask more. We just sat together, listening to the sound of leaves brushing against the window glass. Life's pace felt slower than usual. I moved out, renting a small room near a quiet student neighborhood, not to hide, but to start over, in a place where memories didn't hold me prisoner. I planted a small pot of flowers on the windowsill, watered it every morning, as if I needed something alive, silent, but present. I kept studying, but I chose a new course, writing therapy. I sat in a room, surrounded by strangers, telling the stories of their wounds. No one interrupted anyone. No one said, "You have to be strong." We just listened to one another, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't been able to name for so long. Safety. One weekend afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Madison. The paper folded in thirds, the handwriting firm and steady. I will never be able to get back everything I lost, but I have gotten myself back. And that's the most valuable thing. Thank you for not giving up. I read it 3 times, folded it, placed it into the notebook I had kept with me since the very beginning of this story. I used to think fate was something we couldn't change. Now I understand. Fate is the way you choose to stand back up after thinking you never could. I still see Ethan from afar once in a while, in crowded places. No words, no glances. We passed each other like 2 strangers who knew each other's memories best, and I felt no anger, no pity, only calm. Perhaps forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about no longer letting that person live inside you as a ghost. One night, I rewrote the last line in my notebook. I had once written, "Justice doesn't bring happiness." Now I added a small line beneath it, in a different ink. But it paves the way for you to find happiness in your own way. By the end of the year, I was chosen as a speaker for the Human Rights Scholarship Award ceremony. I stood at the podium, microphone in hand, looking out into the audience. There was Madison, Lena, even Margot, and my mother. She nodded. A slight nod. I nodded back. No words needed. I began my speech with just one sentence I once sank. But now, I choose to swim. Not because I'm special, but because I chose not to live as if I were a wound. I am a person, with a past, with choices, with the right to stand, and if you have ever been pushed under, I hope you know that one day you will rise. And when that day comes, you won't need anyone to pull you up. You'll know how to keep yourself afloat. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. This is not just the story of a survivor, but a wake-up call for everyone who has ever been dragged under in silence. If you have ever seen yourself in any of these moments, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell your own story. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark so you won't miss the next stories about justice, courage, and rebirth. We are not alone, and your voice always matters.